Folks, welcome inside the Brady Broadcasting Studios at 25 East Glen. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. So happy you could be part of the program today. As Branch Rickey said, luck is the residue of design. If that's the case, then this host walked ass backwards into Lucky Thompsonville, exploring the players who created regional music in this country prior to full interconnection. Cosmic Cowboys, who played with Hugh Masekela, Blue Mitchell, Dave Brubeck, Cleveland Eaton, Donald Duck Dunn, James Brown, Randy Weston, Raka and Bill Monroe. These cats were street scholars coming out of heterogeneous neighborhoods with Jewish families bordering on Italian neighborhoods, which bordered on black neighborhoods, where the messages of Sam Cooke and Wilson Pickett, O.C. Smith, and Johnny Nash permeated elaborate high school bands, opportunities in burgeoning studio scenes, game shows, commercials, strip clubs, second cities, intermeshing live stand-up by Alan Arkin, followed by improvisation from the Ghost Opera, in a brave new world where I lead a life, you lead a life, and constant creation is paramount to further evolution as a human being. My guest figured this out early in his career, deftly navigating relationships with blue-eyed soul singers and tripped-out drummers who swung the band to wash away the dust of everyday life. That was the purpose of the live music event, when there was light, a middle class, and cats who wanted to be links in the chain for younger generations of musicians who were looking to be the straw that stirred the drink. Maybe it was a sissy drink concocted by the late great Herb Wong, or a beer with 2 shots of bourbon in it made famous by Butterfield and Bishop playing all-night gigs on the south side of Chicago. Or even better, late-night care packages from Bob Krasnow and Tommy LaPuma, who knew they were dealing with crazed hipsters like my guest, who has continued to be resourceful, using what he has around him, not in excess, but rather letting the music come through him. Like a wise man once told me, you don't choose music, it chooses you. Ben Sidran, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Wow, Jake, that was like an R. Crumb version of my last 40 years. I love it.
Well, I'm glad I caught you in this. You've been out of the country a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's nice to. What were you gigging over there?
I was finishing up an album. I have a French partner that I work with on the last 4 or 5 CDs I've done, and so we were over there recording. You know, the Dylan Different project was done up in a farmhouse in Alsace. The Don't Cry for No Hipster thing was done in New York, but was done in conjunction with them. So I got a new record out. It's called Benny and the Dreamers. Well, it's not out. It'll be done in September, October. So that's where I was. I was in Paris. Singing and mixing. You know,
this question came across my radar this morning. I was thinking, I talked to African drummer from the Arts Ensemble of Chicago, Famadou Don Moy, and he ran through this laundry list, of cats that Art Farmer just comes to mind, Johnny Griffin, all these guys that moved to Europe. And I want to know from you, was it because they felt like their art was not appreciated here and there was a lot of economic opportunity in Europe, or was it just racism?
You know, I just finished reading a biography of Ben Webster, who lived in Copenhagen at the end of his life and I think died there. And if his story is any example, it was a combination of all those things. Keep in mind, at the end of the 60s, the rock and roll revolution just changed the work scene dramatically in the United States. And the clubs that used to be jazz clubs, this is by the early 70s, had either closed or become singer-songwriter clubs or whatever. It was tough playing gigs for a minute there. And, well, racism is always some kind of factor. It doesn't matter what kind. It's a factor. And so there's a commercial thing, and also idiomatically, you know, Johnny Griffin, Art Farmer, the guys you mentioned, they're playing classic adult straight up jazz. This
Right,
is not
right.
fashion music.
Right.
And the business kind of became a fashion business, and so you go to Europe, and they have a longer eye on history. They understand history, and they understand the importance of a life as expressed in the music, and summed up in. I mean, the life and the music are part of the same thing. It's not an act, I guess, is what I'm saying. And so much of what the music business became after the 70s was about theater, or at least an act. All these things, I think, is what Europe was about.
Yeah, it's and you continue to go there today. I often, I've developed a good relationship with your daughter-in-law, Amanda. She says that your son Leo is a musician, and I wonder about what when you look at it, can you point to advantages that he has living in 2014, and also things that you wish he had at his disposal that you might have had back when you were just a buck and bronco?
Well, Leo's fortunate in that he's just old enough, he's in his late 30s, to have grown up around the real guys. I mean, he grew up around Johnny Griffin and Phil Woods and John Hendricks and Carla Thomas and Steve Miller and whoever, He grew up around actual musicians, so that's what's missing in most young musicians' lives today. They didn't actually have access to the people. So in his case, I think he really... he's very comfortable in what he does, and I think that those of us 40, 50 years ago wanted very badly to figure out how to do this. There wasn't really a business back then like there is now. But there were periods of discomfort having to deal with the record industry and the expectations and stuff. I think he's much more comfortable than I was. But on the other hand, the grass always looks greener 40 years ago. So maybe
even if you
would
weren't
like to
alive,
have been
yeah.
with me in the 60s, and I would love to have been in New York in the 40s. So who knows,
I just interviewed this pianist, Richard Wyans, Kenny Burrell's pianist, and he was the guy went to Berkeley High School in 1945. This is just like. And you're right. These traditional, classic, adult jazz clubs it was just, I really don't. I'm not a snob. I don't. But Ben, I don't understand how music or melodic improvisation can be played in a mall. It has to be played on a street corner. I mean, I know we're not going. Everything you made the point so well. It's all become surface. And yet you've navigated around that the best you can. But, what are the essential ingredients to get back to the indigenous, to the earth, especially in this age of digitization?
Right. Well, the gig is the place. You can make something happen in a room of anywhere from 40 to 400 people. You can turn that room out. You can create an experience. It gets larger than that. It's very tough. Certainly in a concert situation, you're not going to get the spirit in the room the same way. But the reward is being where it's going on, when it's going on. And that's a feeling that is transformative. And so I love playing gigs, where I can do that. I don't love what I have to go through, to get the gig, to travel there, to do all the stuff. Just airplanes alone are a drag. But the way to do it is to, focus on, as Phil Woods said to me once, you have to focus on the first moment when you played a note and it sounded good to you. And what did that feel like? They go, fuck, man, I played that.
Right.
I could do this. And he also said, that as you get older, playing isn't the problem. Wanting to play becomes the problem because, you get older, the desire for desire becomes an issue. So all these things, man, you want to just try to keep that fire going, man. That's it.
No, this is just talking to you keeps my fire going. It's Can you talk a little bit about your book, There Was a Fire? That you can't. I would love you to. I thought it was such a just reading about some of those scenes of those first generation cats that came over and the kind of communities that they built and the kind of ethnic instruments that they brought. I don't want to go back in time. I'm not trying to preserve, but I want to promote that kind of. I use the word heterogeneous, but I just see the homogenization of our country, and it drives me insane. And so, talk about that book, and what were sort of the underlying goals that you wanted to, or the hopes that you have that would reach people.
Well, look, the book is called Jews, Music, and the American Dream. There Was a Fire. And it's called There Was a Fire because it refers to a story about a Hasidic rabbi back in the Pale of Settlement, and it's kind of a shaggy dog story. But ultimately, what it comes down to is if you can't build the fire, maybe just the memory that there was a fire will be sufficient and the people could be saved. And so, on one sense, the book is about remembering yourself into existence. And the Jewish tradition, of course, is very much about memory and remembering. But at the same time, they call Jews the people of the book, but the book isn't the Torah, I don't think. I think the book is the Talmud, which are the commentaries on the Torah. So what we're remembering is this ongoing discussion that's been going on for 5,000 years, whatever it is, around some very central ideas. One of them, the idea that there's only one God,
Sure.
Another idea that subsequently social justice is imperative, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that place is very important, which you imply in your question. What you're saying is, now with the Internet, everybody's on the Internet. The Internet's everywhere, but the Internet's nowhere. It's not a sense of place. You're not grounded. You're not from anywhere. The story I wrote is very much an American story, which I discovered when I was in Paris about 6 months ago. I was doing a series of lectures, and I talked at the Sorbonne in Paris. And afterwards, there were questions. And what I realized was that I write from the point of view of an American experience, a very secularized Jewish experience that I would say the majority of Jewish people my age had some familiarity with. But in Europe, and particularly in France, the idea of secular Judaism is a non-starter. If you're identified as a Jew, then you have to somehow fit into the religious scheme of things. And generally speaking, because religion is not that overwhelming there, most people don't identify as a Jew, even though they know they may be or their family was.
Mm-hmm.
So what I found out, first of all, that I didn't know when I started, was the story I was telling was a very American story. It was a story about America, the American experience. And the American experience is a Jewish experience. I mean, Jews don't want to talk about that, and nobody else does either. But the fact of the matter is, what we consider the backbone of the American dream, the ideas of social justice, of taking care of those less fortunate, of social work, of, give us your tired, your poor, your tempest-tossed. That thing was written by a little Jewish girl, Emma Lazarus. And so the connection between music and this idea of a Jewish ethos, of the social justice, or just honoring the common man, which is a very American experience, that's specific to a place and a time. And that's the place and time in which we grew up. So I think to really understand whether it's a jazz solo or a premise like this, you have to understand where you come from. Where you come from is your context, and it allows you to understand what's going on. And if you come from, I can't understand Japanese no theater. I just can't. It's because I don't come from that.
Right.
So I think place is really important, and place to the Jews has been disguised as relatively unimportant because they were traveling for so long. But to whom could place become more important than somebody who has no home?
Oh, this is poetry, and supposedly Ben Sidran groggy, but not even impacted at this point. But the Jews also, the long view of history. You used that word before, where the Europeans have this longer view. I mean, do you find, there's a lot of cats I come across now, younger cats. I mean, they're very eager to learn about history, but yet a lot of them don't even realize that stuff existed before Sex and the City. And how do you? So forget about going to a seminar or a colloquium in France, but if you're trying to reach a younger group of people that don't have that depth, I mean, do you become irascible? How do you handle that?
Well, I had somebody come up to me recently and talk to me about what I do, and after the conversation, he said, it's just amazing that my son, who loves music and he's very hip, he doesn't even know about you. I mean, you have a job to do to somehow get across to him and his cohort, don't you? And I said, no, I don't have that job. He has a job of trying to find me. That's his job. The job is to be yourself and carry on. And it's turned into a different job here called Everything's for Sale, the price of everything and the value of nothing.
That's right.
Scarcity drives value up, theoretically, in classic economic terms, which means there's nothing wrong with being scarce from time to time, and not sending out 140 tweets a day as to where you are and what you're doing. I mean, I think one of the key things, I think there are two key things to survive today intact. One of them is to make sure you're having some kind of fun, because that is the response to all the crazy fear-mongers out there. You can actually enjoy yourself. You have survived. And the other thing is stop being afraid of empty canvases and open time. Turn the smartphone off. Don't be afraid of sitting there not knowing what you're thinking. How else are you going to find out what you're thinking? Disconnect a little bit. I think those two things could go a long way. And they're not even specific to music. They're just specific to being able to hear something when it comes by.
Do you, I forgot to ask you this in our first interview. Can you talk to me about the first time that you saw Tony Williams play, and then the first time that you collaborated with Tony?
Probably was the same day.
So
heard Tony play a lot, of course, but I don't think I'd ever seen him live until we went in the studio.
Go ahead. Tell me how that came about. I mean, how did that was a choice? I mean, because we talked about Upchurch and Stubblefield. That was just an act of God there.
Tony. I had a mutual friend with Tony's, and I had made this record called "I Lead a Life," which there's a track on it called "When a Woman Says She's Ready," and it opens with a fade up on a drum beat, a bass drum beat, and the bass drum fades up until it hits a point, and at that point, the band comes in and the song starts. And Tony loved that. He loved that I thought of opening something like that, opening that way. And he liked the record, and he said that he wanted to make a kind of not a R&B record as such, or a pop record. He didn't use those terms, but he had this band with a couple of synthesizer players in it. One guy named David Horowitz, a very good player. He's now a commercial arranger in New York. And a singer, a woman named Tequila, and he loved Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and he loved pop music and all that stuff. And he wanted, his Tony Williams Lifetime, which was the model for Miles's Bitches Brew period, that was Tony's idea.
Right.
That idea of what became known as...
don't say it. Don't say it. Yeah, no, it just, I know, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, that idiom, that, Larry Young and that band, Tony kind of was ahead of that curve. He was young. He was a kid. He really was a kid. So that's what he wanted to do, and that's what we set up to do, and we did it in Boston. We did it at a studio in Boston because Tony was from Boston. And, well, anyway, that's how the record came down, and the first time I saw him play was standing next to the kit with an engineer having a conversation with Tony about miking drums, about drum miking.
Were you, if I remember correctly, there was an album he did in Boston called Throw the Bums Out.
The Old Bums Rush.
The Old Bums Rush, but so that was the first time because Herb Bushler was on that album. I'm thinking about
That's right.
I'm thinking about putting in time.
Exactly right. That's the record.
That's the record with Tequila. I was like, this is, now you can give me insight. So who was, where, Tequila? What, who were these cats?
Well, Herb Bushler was a player.
Oh, I know I've interviewed Herb, yeah.
But Tequila was somebody Tony found in a club in New York. He liked the way she sang. They were sleeping together.
Okay. Yep.
She was, she wasn't a songwriter as such, but she was definitely confident enough to hang with Tony and those guys musically. And it was a stretch back then. There weren't too many people trying to figure out what's the bridge between Bitches Brew and Tom Petty, and she was in there with him.
And then ultimately you had him come out, or did he come out for Putting in Time on Planet Earth? He's playing on some of those tracks.
Yeah, he came to Chicago for some of those tracks. We had done some other stuff in the interim, there were other little things, so we had stayed in touch.
He was, today you see a lot of guys I talk to, they talk about younger people having these monster chops. They technically can play everything, but they lack the soul, so to speak. And you talked before about one of these unplugging from the distractions. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm not plugged in too much too. It's a tantalizing thing. It's an ego thing, but a lot of the older guard, when they see these younger players play, they don't want to hear it, because it's all that person being, look at me, look at me, look at me, as opposed to sort of the accompanist model or the Tony Williams model of, just swinging the band. And, I wanted you to talk a little bit about a couple of younger, it doesn't have to be younger musicians, just a couple of musicians who you feel really epitomize the soul. The technique is there, but it's more about feel. It's about feel. It's not the drum track. It's not the click track. It's just about feel. Who are those cats that you look at and say, it's just inside them?
Oh, there must be. It must be the same percentage that there always was, but because there are so many more people out there playing, there's just a mob.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to break out.
Right.
I mean, your premise reminds me a little bit again of this Ben Webster biography I was talking about, where, he couldn't play as fast as Coleman Hawkins or as Don Byas, but he focused on his sound, and he could play one note, and you knew it was Ben Webster, and he would break your heart. And so he became a lot of people's favorite saxophone players, even though he wasn't as good a reader. So now we've got a bunch of young kids who are really well trained, and who are very serious students, very serious musicians, who have got all the technique and all this stuff under their fingers. But, the way Ben Webster came up, there was a certain amount of risk and adversity to his process. For example, he started out as a piano player. He kind of liked the idea of playing saxophone. At one point, a band came through town looking for a saxophone player. He went and played for a couple of days on somebody else's horn and said, well, I can do this, and just bold-faced lied his way into the gig and learned on the gig. And, I mean, that could never happen today.
Never.
And subsequently, we could never get a stylist like Ben Webster today, because the music is about a life again. It's not about the notes. It's the classic expression, it's about the space between the notes, And that space, another name for that is life. And today, you can hear, when you hear a guy who's kind of kept control of that aspect. I mean, one guy I will mention is a saxophone player named John Ellis, who's in New York and who I work with from time to time, who I absolutely love playing with him because he has that life. You know, it's not that he's the fastest player or the most out player or the most in player or any of that. He's just himself. He's a good, really good player, and always fun to be with. And you know, I mean, so it's everywhere you look for it. It's just harder to find.
Yeah, and then you mentioned this. He's himself. It's called authenticity, and you know, you're a lot of times people, younger cats today, feel compelled to have to sound like this person or that, or just in anything they do. I mean, people listen to my radio shows and they say, well, he doesn't do it the right way. But there is no right way. It's my way. And what I'm saying is, you talk about Webster, you know, that to me is so unique. Again, yeah, he wasn't truthful. Nowadays, they do a background check on him and find out he had no experience playing the horn. So it would never happen. You know, it's like we become a nosier society. I just think it was, you know, if you weren't home, there wasn't an answering machine, and you're more sane because of it, you know, but now that listen, you're just one of the guys, and they've all adapted to it. They've all figured out for the most part, you know, a lot of starving geniuses. When you know, the older guard, you look at Woody Herman, you look at Joe Williams, you look at some of these cats, they slept in alleyways, and yet, you know, as life got more comfortable, people moved to suburbia. How are you supposed to sing about the blues if you've not had anything blue in your life?
Yeah, well, the human condition will always be there. It'll give you material. There's plenty of material.
What do you?
Know, listen to Mose Allison's lyrics. You know, the guy's basically a Southern gentleman and a middle class guy, and he can find a lot of material in just normal life. So, I mean, I don't think that's so much the problem. Is that you know, when I talk about a life like Ben Webster's, you know, that's gone. That world is gone. There's no coming back. A couple things that most people don't pay attention to, but one is how much noisier it is in the world we live in than the world those guys lived in. You just think about it. How much quieter it was on the streets in the 40s, even in Manhattan, anywhere. So you had a different acoustic context for anything. That surely had an influence on somebody developing a sound like Ben Webster, which is all about the breath that came out. So there's that. And the other thing is it's just so much more crowded. There are people everywhere. Whatever you want to do, you want to play tenor saxophone, it's crowded. Everything is crowded now. You want to get on a plane and go to Chicago, it's crowded. Back then, you took a day and a half and got on a train and went to Chicago, and there was no cell phone. There might have been a bar car. You know, it's just so you're not going to get people who play like they're in the bar car because they're not.
My engineer Jim Brady, back in the late 70s, was a radio host for one of the earliest FM radio stations in Tucson, KWFM, and picked you up from the gig and interviewed you in the studio back in the late 70s when you were down here in Tucson.
Huh. That's interesting. I remember playing in Tucson in the late 70s. I remember staying, I don't know why you associate Bob Dylan was staying at this place, but I remember staying at this really cool place.
Yeah, Hotel Congress, I bet.
Yep.
And that's where all sorts of you know, marauders and Western gunfights took place out there. Well, do you remember what kind of band that was? Who was in that band?
The band that I was playing with?
Mm-hmm.
In the late 70s, it would have been a drummer named Bill Meeker. Just a fantastic drummer. Bass player was, this is funny. I don't remember exactly. Well, it could have been one of two bands, because it kind of depends. If it was actually 70s and not early 80s, then it wasn't Ron McClure. I played with Ron McClure and Jimmy Madison at one point.
Two of my favorite cats. But that was you're saying that was in the 80s.
It was in 79 or 80. Before that, it was Bill Meeker and a bass player named Gary Zappa and a guitar player named Curly Cook. It was like a little smoking acoustic piano, bebop rhythm and blues band.
Because he told me that my engineer was like, yeah, he's like, and that was my dream. I mean, the idea that, it was we couldn't get that deep, but he literally picked you up, brought you to the studio, did a 15-minute, thing for the, and it just to me like that is that, and that's another thing that's long gone. But my question was, before I lost you, tell me if you were in this at all. Did you do jingles? Did you do commercials in Chicago? I know you weren't a studio cat, but when I talked to Cleveland Eaton, he's like, I did 13 gigs in one day. Did you ever do anything like that?
No. I didn't. Upchurch did.
No.
Those guys, there was a big commercial scene in Chicago. A lot of ad agencies there, a lot of manufacturing companies, food manufacturing, all sorts of transportation stuff. Chicago was a great recording scene for a long time. I did not participate in that at all. I went in the 60s. I was in college. In the 70s, I started out in L.A. and then got kind of in the record business. So I never really did the studio thing.
Can you talk to my audience and specifically to me as well about your performance schedule for the summer and fall?
Comes and goes a lot. I love it. Let's see.
I'm hoping for a New York gig in June.
Yeah, let me see. Well, I just played in New York in a little club in Brooklyn called Barbess. Great little joint, like a hole in the wall. June, I'm going to be in New York, but I'm not playing. Sorry to tell you. I try actually in the summers not to play that. I love being in my home in the summer. It's the only time when it's just gorgeous. So I try June, July, August, even September to not travel so much. I can tell you where I've been in the last month. It will give you some sense of where I might turn up.
Well, no, I guess before we move on, if you're in New York, I'm just saying my family, we're all going back from Tucson to New York in June. If you have, I just love to buy you a cup of coffee and meet you at some point if you're there.
Well, contact Amanda. She's the way in.
I know. No, I figured that out. So, no, talk about recent performances and how you've been bobbing and weaving and surviving.
Yeah, well, I did a book performance in Berkeley, for example, where there's a piano. I had the saxophone player named Mel Martin with me.
Oh, wow. I love Mel.
You know Mel.
Oh, I love Azteca. That guy was legend.
Yeah,
legend.
That's right.
Oh, God.
So we did it as a duo, the two of us, where I read from the book and we played the songs. We played Take Me Out to the Ball Game, we played Over the Rainbow, we played whatever it was.
It's cool.
That was in Berkeley. I did in Atlanta. I went to Atlanta and did it solo, the same sort of thing, the text of the book. I was in, where else? I actually have to open up my computer. I played a bunch of gigs. Let me think.
Well, no, hold on. While you're digging that up, I wrote that unknowingly in my intro about you just being resourceful with the things around you. And for my audience, just think about that. You're using the book, and you're just singing songs. I think that's another key to our materialism and sort of the drive in today's society that money is all powerful. Is that, what do you have around you that you can cultivate that can make you give you peace, whether you're a musician or whatever else? To me, that's one of your strengths, is that you're able to think and say, what do I have? What can I work with right in my environment, as opposed to needing all this tech equipment and the top of the line this and you know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think that's part of my investment strategy, which is very broad,
Right.
Very broad investment. I invest in myself broadly. And the strategy is to follow every lead until either it plays out or it dies out.
Right, that's good.
Do all the work.
That's a great piece of advice.
And because you never know, you do know 80% of your ideas will fail. You just don't know which 80%. So you have to do all of them.
Right on.
And so, yeah, I'm in San Francisco. I'm getting to hang with an old pal, Mel, who I've known for years and years, and play a gig. And the gig is related to jazz, and it's also related to something that's currently on my plate, which is the whole history and, in some ways, social philosophy of Jews in America. So that's fun. And at the same time, I will go off and play a bebop gig with a quartet in Madrid for 5, 6, 7 nights and not do any of that other stuff. Just play it like a straight-up bebop gig. It's all fun to me. People sometimes ask me, you're producing or you're writing or you're playing and blah, blah, blah. Which do you prefer? And the honest answer is they all feel the same to me. And, you mentioned Tony Williams before, which is a very interesting parallel. I once said to him, Tony, if you can play the way you play like God, why do you want to play a straight-up rock and roll backbeat? Because he loved it. And he said, well, that you don't understand, man. They both feel the same to me. And so I get it. I got it. It's all about how it feels to you. If it feels good to you, do it.
Yeah, well, you just floored me with that. Ben, listen, I know you're jet lagged, and I want you to, go out on your porch, take a rest, and we'll be in touch. But I'll be in touch with Amanda. I will take a train in from Long Island to meet you if we can make that happen.
Go ahead, man. I hope to see you soon.
All right, man. Great to talk to you, Ben. Thank you so much, brother.
Thanks, Jacob. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, and we'll see you all in a little bit.